Ready?
Yeah.
Cool. Welcome to the first University of Iowa Environmental Coalition Sustainability Lecture Series of the semester. I'm Chelsea Christ.
I'm Marco Jimenez.
We're co-presidents of the UIEC. So thanks to PS1 again. Thanks, John, for everything. We love coming down here and having this space. We just started this up last semester. And so the idea of it is basically just to bring in anyone who we're interested in or fascinated by to talk about sustainability in their lives. Tonight we have, no, Julia can't make it tonight. Tonight we have our faculty advisor, David Osterberg, who's also the executive director of the Iowa Policy Project. That's a nonprofit in Iowa City that writes policy as far as like renewable energies go, and so he's going to talk a little bit about wind power tonight. So thanks for coming. Free cookies all night. Don't feel shy to get them.
Okay, thanks very much. What a couple of you are going to see, August and Catherine, saw an art, something kind of like this, except you get new stuff because there's new information since I talked to you a month ago. And for other environmental coalition people, last year I did a talk here. How many I know Chelsea was there. I don't know how many other people were there. Oh, okay. Well, it's kind of a takeoff on that as well. But that you would find new stuff for, and you guys will find new stuff for. But it's kind of some stuff, things that I'm interested in. And again, Chelsea said, I teach here, and then I also am run this thing called the Iowa Environmental Council, what do we call it now? Iowa Policy Project, which is a coalition of, we do a lot more than the environment. We also do a lot on state public policy on the budget. You guys are getting screwed and at the University of Iowa because they won't put enough money in. We say things like that. And we also deal with poor people issues. Not that many people care about it. So I want to start out talking about how we can be sustainable, in the sense, how can we make energy and not at the same time warm up the earth so much that it may be a very, very different kind of place 30 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, for sure. And basically you can do that without carbon dioxide. You can do it with nuclear power. I have to tell you that 3 times I've testified before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, always on the side of people who don't like nuclear power. But nuclear power certainly is a way of getting electricity without putting that much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You can do it through efficiency. You can do it through conservation. You can do it through renewable power. And I'm going to talk mainly about wind tonight. Difference between efficiency and conservation, I always give the same example. And I'm giving this example because it's a little better. I mean, I drive a hybrid car, right? I'm a professor. I ought to drive a hybrid car. I drive it too far. So while efficiency I do real well on, conservation I don't do much at all. I drive 21 miles a day each way. Now it's better because now I'm taking another person from Mount Vernon every Tuesday and every other Wednesday. So my carbon footprint going down a little bit. Still is not very good. There's no reason why more people shouldn't be coming, and why we don't think about our whole lifestyles in that way. We all need to be thinking about reducing that. But I'm going to talk about wind power. And the first slide I have here is probably one of the ones that I really want you to understand. So I'm going to take some time. This is wind generating capacity by region in the world. And you will notice that if we go back to 1980, you find there's hardly any wind power any place in the entire world. These circles, you can hear the scales down here. This circle here, that size, that's about 2.5 gigawatts. That's about 2,500 megawatts. The Wayne Arnold Energy Center, which is about 40 miles from here up near Cedar Rapids, That's around a 600 megawatt power plant. So 2,500 megawatts for a small nuclear power plant. That's a rather small one, 600 megawatts. Okay? You see North America, Europe, you don't see, you can hardly see that. From the back road, I'm sure you cannot see it at all. But by 1985, just 5 years later, all of a sudden there was quite a bit of wind power in the world. It pretty much all was in California. And it was there because of the policy of a previous governor who is now, just like we have Terry Branstad, the former and now present governor, same thing happened with Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown, when he was back, cared a lot about the same things we're talking about now, climate change, and in ways that we ought to be making electricity without that big carbon footprint. So his administration and the pretty liberal California legislature decided they would pay more money to producers if they produced electricity that came from renewable sources. And that's what happened. All of a sudden we go to about 1,000 megawatts. 947 is the number up there. About 1,000 megawatts. You see what's going on in Europe? Nothing going on in Europe. By 1990, we're still increasing a little bit. It went up in 5 years about 500 megawatts, about a Dwayne Arnold's energy center's worth. But Europe is kicking it up. But by 1995, there was a reversal, and all of a sudden, most of the wind power that exists in the world is in Europe, much of it in Denmark. Much of the production of wind power comes from a couple of Danish companies because they came over, tried to figure out how to capture wind and make it into electricity in an efficient manner. That's what went on in California. This was the shakeout that had to happen in order for us to get an industry going. If you go to the Alamo Pass, for instance, which is near San Francisco, which I did in about 1991-92, there were 7,000 wind turbines, 7,000 of them, all right up against one another along this pass. And of those 7,000, half were complete junk. It just didn't work. You had to figure out how to make electricity from wind. And people had kind of egg beater kind of things. They had things that went backwards from the wind. They had forward 3-blade ones, which became the norm. All of that. But all of that you had to figure out, and you had to develop, and we developed it, and the Danes took it away and made an incredible industry out of it. And so 2002, a few years later, we see where we are, and 75% of all the wind power in the world has now gone to Europe, Germany, Spain, Denmark. There are, by that time, about 30,000 megawatts, about 31, you can see the number, 127 megawatts. So, if we were doing Dwayne Arnold energy center sizes, there'd be, what? How many? 600 into that is about 50? Is that right? 50 nuclear powers. But actually it's a small nuke. So let's say a big nuke. 30 big nukes worth. That's what a big nuclear power plant is. It's 1,000 megawatts. Okay? There it is. You have most of it in Europe, a little bit in the United States, and the rest of the world isn't very much at all. That's where it's really happening in these two kind of places. Now 3 years later, 2002, and I want to go to 2005. First thing, we've gone up, we've doubled, about 60,000 megawatts from about 30,000. Germany, the leader by quite a bit, twice as much as in the United States at that time. The United States behind Spain, close to Spain. India, Denmark. Denmark, again, little teeny country, still has a lot of wind power. 3 years later, we've doubled again, 120,000 megawatts in 2008. And now the United States has overtaken Germany, which is the leading producer. And all of a sudden you see another player here, and that is China. And now if we look at the latest numbers, and that's why I was happy to be asked to do this, because these numbers came out Monday. So it's brand new stuff. We've got up to 2380. So if we look back where we were in 2002, 3,100, double in 3 more years, So 2002 to 2005, we double. We double again, and we have just doubled again. 3-year doubling time is pretty rapid, and if you can continue to do that, we can save the Earth. You need to do it almost that fast in order for it to happen. If you look individually, you find that we brought about 40,000 megawatts, or 40 gigawatts, if I want to use that term, of power on. Again, we are increasing, but I'm a little worried because we were kind of going like this, and now we seem to be leveling off, and that may be what's going on in the world. I want to make a couple more points about this. But the first one is wind power is growing in the world at around a doubling time of 3 years. That's very fast. And I'll show you what that means in a minute. Where it is, and this is the Global Wind Energy Council, GWEC, just go online, gwec.com maybe, or org, I can't remember which. And that will tell you where both the total amount of installed capacity is in the world, and here we are, about 240,000 megawatts. China, the leader. You know, just a few years ago, the United States was the leader. China has just really taken over. The US, Germany, again, Spain, India starting up, but these are the big countries. Those four, I guess. China, the US, Germany, Spain, maybe India, those five. And if you look over here, the share, China now has, of what the new power brought on, 44% of it came in China. The US brought in about 17%, India about 7%, and then those other countries. But notice this. So if you look at China, this is cumulative, kind of close, you know, and then the United States. Germany, Spain, India, France, UK, Italy, Portugal, and then you see this stuff. This thing is the rest of the world. And if you think about this as a pie, this is half, this is 3/4, this would be a quarter, so you're half of that. 12 or 13% is all there is in the rest of the world, which says to me, there's a lot more that can be done with wind. These are not the only places where the wind blows. And so it also says to me, this is policy that's driving it. Good policy, we get more wind. Other kind of policy, we don't. And so to make changes, in order, again, since everybody here I think is interested in trying to cut down the amount of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere and cut down what we see as a rapid increase in temperature on Earth, we got to have better policy to do it. Here's some other numbers. Again, about, you can see the portion of that 2,800 megawatts that is in Europe, and it's about 96, almost 100. The United States and Canada. And here's the big thing is China. China and India, but China. So, two things to say about that. And one is what I've been talking about, doubling times. There's something called the rule of 72. And so you take any number and you divide it into 72 and it gives you a doubling time. So what this says is last year we increased the total amount of wind by about 22%. So 21% into 72 comes out 3 and something. So our doubling time is moving back a little bit from about 3 years to more like 3.5. We're still doing several couple of previous years. That's pretty fast. What that says is even though it seems very, very difficult, when somebody tells you that there was a study done back in 2008, and it was based on the latest data, which was 2006, and it talked about the U.S. getting to 20% of all of its electricity produced from wind, and getting there by the year 2030. We would need 300,000 megawatts. 300,000 megawatts, and we only had 11,000. And if you just look at that and say, how can we get from here to there, and you feel like, well, just giving up or something, because it seems so hard to do, think of doubling times. Double 11,000 you get 22,000. And we double again. Come on, I know you're not laughing. Okay, 44. Nobody go for the computers. This is not that hard. Double again. Well, I think I even have it here. How many doubling times? How many doubling times do you think it is?
4.
Yeah, 4.
4.5, 5.
5. 5 doubling times. If you're doubling every 3 years, that's 15 years. Does that get us there before 2030? You betcha. Can we do it? Of course we can. If you have the policy to do it. If you have the policy to do it. And so 5 doublings between 2006 and 2030, it only requires doubling every 4 or 5 years, and we'd be able to do that. Now after saying that, I'm going to say just the opposite. You can't count on what you've seen in the past. Because if I were to say that, I would tell you that right now we would have 95% of our electricity being produced by nuclear power, because that's exactly what's happening with nuclear power until we get up to this point and it flattens out. That point being, can you guess? Chernobyl. Yeah, Chernobyl. All of a sudden it didn't seem like such a good idea. Or this year, Fukushima. But it was that kind of moving upwards. So don't count on it. Don't count on us getting there. But we can. It's certainly possible. A report that came out last June, June 2011, shows how we would get there. And right now, this is the real amount of wind power brought on each year in 2006 up to 2010. 2009, we were doing really well. 2010, we dropped off, and they didn't have the 2011 data at the time. And as I told you, it just came out this week. We came in right about here at just over 6,000 megawatts. So we're fine. We're above what we need to be doing to get to that point. But pretty soon, we're going to have a lot more wind power brought on. See what that graph means? It's just a graph saying, if we're going to get over here to 2030 to have 300,000, how much would we need each year? Getting up to a point and then kind of leveling off. That's the way most industries do. So right now we're doing fine. We brought on 10,000 megawatts back in the year 2009, but only in a couple of years we're going to have to be bringing in about 15 or 16. And we may get there, we may not. So I'm somewhat sanguine about the industry here, but only if we make good policy. Iowa wind. You ought to know about Iowa. I mean, this is a graph from 2 years ago which shows you where the wind power is produced around the nation. And you find that Texas is the leader, but you find number 2 in the world, 2 in the United States happens to be Iowa. Did everybody know that? Everybody knows that? Well, I mean, you're kind of a select group. I mean, if I walked up and down the mall, I don't think I'd find that answer. But yeah, we're number 2. And we're still increasing the amount of electricity we get. And we're now up, and this is the latest stuff from the American Wind Energy Association. What I wanted to do is give you that same map of the United States, but they now have, this is proprietary information, and you have to pay them $100 a year for it. So, but 4322 megawatts. We brought on 647 last year. Under construction still is another 470. But this number says this is not capacity. It's more than capacity. It's where people have said, we're thinking about a wind farm up here. And we've been thinking about it. And so they even went as far as to say, by the year 2022, we're going to need some room on the grid, so we're telling you ahead of time. That's where that number comes from. Is that a question?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Just ask questions. I mean, ask questions if you want. Make sure you understand each of the things I'm saying. The other thing about this is also from UIEC, American Wind Energy Association. Iowa turns out to be one of those states that has got in fast enough, so we've really begun to dominate the industry of producing this stuff. Used to be that the Danes produced it all. We're doing a whole lot in the United States. We're doing a whole lot in the state of Iowa. And this is another one of those graphs that tells you where the wind is the best. And this is where it's the best. So, and you see that that's the area that you found the first wind farms. And this whole area is quite good for making wind. This isn't real good. And here's Iowa City in the worst for Iowa. But if you look at a map of the United States, the worst in Iowa ain't that bad. We're getting a whole lot of development going on in Illinois where much of the territory is no better than the state of Iowa. And it's just that this is where we ought to be producing wind, and in fact we are beginning to do that. North Dakota is finally kicking it and finally moving up. Yeah.
The other map showed that Utah, it looked like didn't have any wind energy going on. Is there policies against it there, or is it? I mean, I see it's mostly green, but other states are.
And you'll see another state that has incredible wind. I mean, look at that one.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we ought to have all of it. And let's go back and look at where they were in Nebraska a few years ago. And what's in Nebraska? 153.
Mm-hmm.
It's policy.
Yeah.
That's my point. That if you look at this, where we ought to be having it, you ought to have, this state ought to be just going gangbusters. And it's not, and it's, and in this case, you can't rail against big, powerful corporations that are trying to rip us off because it's all public power in Nebraska.
Mm.
What you just have is a lot of old white guys who don't want to change at all. And that is the problem with a whole lot of consumer-owned electric companies, I'm afraid. Yeah.
So aside from Texas, none of those are real heavy population centers.
That's right.
So does that matter in terms of like usage? Like they can generate a lot of power there, but there's probably not a whole lot of demand compared to other places.
Compared to other places. And that's why much of what's going on is exporting of electricity from wind outside of the state of Iowa or outside of North Dakota for sure. And but it's still, it goes onto the grid. So kind of wherever it goes, it goes. The problem sometimes is the interconnections in this direction, and especially in that direction, don't exist. We need a lot more of those big, ugly power lines going over some natural area, I'm afraid. So we're going to be conflicted when it comes to where the companies want to put their lines. But we need some more lines. Yes, we do. And that's one of the reasons when you find the percentage of electricity coming from wind, and you look at Denmark versus the state of Iowa, this is correct. This is the right size. Iowa's a whole lot bigger than Denmark. And when we look back in as recently as 2005, Iowa didn't have much. Denmark had a lot. But by a couple of years later, Iowa has passed Denmark. Denmark is the leading country in the world. 20% of its electricity, I think pushing 24% now, comes from wind, and that's where Iowa is right now. Iowa is moving towards a production of about 20, maybe 23% of all of its electricity produced in the state coming from Iowa. But you made a very good point. That's not necessarily used in the state of Iowa. Cost and then doesn't matter. This is where it's produced. It's an export industry. We don't eat all the corn we produce either, I believe. Same thing. So, Iowa Policy Project, back in 2010, decided we wanted to talk about this. The fact that policy is driving this in Iowa, and also that one of the things that always we are told, it seems, remember when Cheney was the vice president? We probably don't, but what he said was, oh, it's all fine to go out and be a conservationist or something, but you're all going to freeze in the dark and be poor if you do that, because it just costs so much money. And so why we did this report is, first of all, to show how fast Iowa wind had come on. This is year by year up to 2010 when we did it. But more important is the second one, rates. Rates in Iowa, high because we have all that wind? No. Iowa electric rates are low in relation to the rest of the nation. And it seems like the rest of the nation is even spreading out a little more from Iowa. We've just seen a rate increase from Alliance since then, from about 3%. 3% of their raise, they increased to like 11%. 3% of it was because of wind, the rest was other stuff. And Mid-Am is now coming up with a rate increase of about 3%. So I think I want to do this graph again and find out where we are, but it's still going to be very, very different. And that's another good thing to say. When you think about what research to do, you think about what effect it might have. This is a lie that is out there that is told again and again and again, and you want to disabuse people of that. Iowa, at least, with the biggest proportion of its electricity coming from wind power, has one of the lowest rates in the nation. Now, this is average rate, so when I come in and say it's 7 cents, realize that's the University of Iowa that's buying stuff for 5, and John Deere that's buying for 4.5 cents a kilowatt, and you getting it for 12 or 13 cents a kilowatt hour. All of that averaged in is only about 7 cents. It's low. It's very low. Denmark, 19.7. They hit 19.7% in 2007. Now they've gone on. And the IUB, the people who actually know this, back in 2010 said we were pushing 20%. And now, this is 2 years, this is a year and a half later, so we're a lot further along. The governor bragged about wind and how you got here. And that's the interesting thing, because how did we get here? Well, there are a couple ways that you can make an industry change. One, you can just give it all the subsidies you can think of. That was kind of like trying to get the movie industry here, where we said, whatever you spend, we'll pay half of it. I mean, you can certainly get an industry that way. It may not be worth it to you, because you have to show an awful lot of good things coming from that economic development. And the other is just to mandate it. And that's what we did in Iowa in 1983, and we were the first state in the nation to put a mandate on our investor-owned utility companies, so they had to get a certain portion of their electricity coming from wind. That was Terry Branstad signed that bill, and so he took all kinds of credit for it. I wrote that bill, as a matter of fact. It was my first year in the state legislature, and I'd been doing consulting on this, and somehow got this thing through. And he didn't veto it. That's as good as he did, but he didn't veto it. So an RPS or an RES is something that exists in many states, and it's a requirement that a certain portion of your electricity has to come from renewable power. In Illinois, it's 25%. Not till 2025, but it's 25%, same as Minnesota, very large numbers. Iowa, it's 2. So even though the requirement is 2, the amount here is 24. Why that happened, I believe, one of it may be Warren Buffett bought the company. So Mid-American is the one company that does a whole lot of the wind. But I believe it was one of these things where you just took the executives at these companies, you took a baseball bat, and you just bang right across the side of their head until they had to try wind power. So when they tried it, all of a sudden they went from what was required of them, 2%, to Mid-Am, which is over 20. That's how you get something started, I believe. It's a mandate. You can also do, I'm not going to talk about PERPA. You can also do the same thing with a feed-in tariff, which is what I prefer. That is what led the first wind power plants to come into California, by you simply paying more for wind power than for other forms. And that's why Germany and Denmark have done so well, and Spain too, is that they have feed-in tariffs in Europe, which allows a movement towards more power. Now, it costs you more, but and the question is, does it cost you so much more that it's not worth it, or does it cost you more, but you get clean power? The other thing you can do is you can look at markets, and you can just help them. You can make them the cost cheaper. And one of the things we've done in the United States is something called the production tax credit at the federal level, where if you produce electricity from wind, you get about 2.1 cents per kilowatt hour back from the federal government. Now, it only lasts for 10 years, so it's not worth that much over the time of your investment, but it's still worth penny and a half per kilowatt hour. And since you're selling this stuff back to the utilities for 3, 4, 5, 6 cents a kilowatt hour, it's a very big amount. It's very important. That federal production tax credit is supposed to go off at the end of the year. And every time that happens, just craziness ensues. People are trying to get in before the credit's over. It's really dumb the way it's done, and I don't know if it's going to get extended. It should. Iowa and Minnesota also have their own tax credits for small wind, for an individual or a small company. And you can only be a part of one of these companies. You can't be a part of 19 and then take advantage of it, not in Iowa anyway. And that has been a way in which we've got a lot of wind power. For instance, Luther and Wartburg have both put in wind turbines, and Luther's was in that queue, and so they got an extra amount of money from the state for putting up a big wind turbine. I think over about a 2 megawatt one. But that's one way. You can also cut your taxes, that kind of stuff, transmission assistance, all of those things. And we've done a lot of them in Iowa. And now, let me tell you how to change politics. Because the point is, you gotta change politics in order to get this. It is a question of not just the technology, it is also the policy. You have to have better policy. And what we try to do at the Iowa Policy Project is turn out wind reports. And this one only goes through 2009, because I haven't thought about fixing this, but we've had a report every year. And I'm thinking about one for this year as well, where you do a paper on what we need to do in order to have more renewable energy. And not that everybody listens to us, but it's at least one of the things you can do. We did a great a paper back in 2005 on wind power in Iowa schools, and Teresa Galuzzo, who is now on leave, but is our environmental researcher, went around and took pictures. We interviewed every single person in every place that had a wind power plant. And schools around Iowa, there are 10 of them who have their own power being produced by wind power. We think there ought to be a lot more, but that's what we have. We've also worked on solar, and this is what we started doing last year. We do not lead in Iowa in solar, and much of the solar is going in where you'd expect it to, where the really sunny days happen. But notice Iowa doesn't look that bad compared to what was the leading country in the world for producing solar power, Germany. Germany is like the worst place you'd ever think of putting up solar panels. And yet, their policy led them to do that for economic development reasons. So, what we do is, besides turning out a paper that shows all kinds of stuff, try to figure out how we could make legislators think about the idea. And so here are 4 legislators, 1, 2, 3, 4, from the Cedar Falls area. We're looking at a big solar array over a parking ramp at UNI, quite a large one, more than 200 kilowatts. When I talk about wind, it's megawatts. Here it's kilowatts, much smaller scale. And the guy we took along is Tim Dwight, who some people know. He was kind of a football hero here, NFL hero. And older guys like to ride on buses with him. So people who didn't care that much about riding a bus with me looking at solar power, when they heard Tim was there, they thought it might be fun. And we're trying to use him again. We're going to do the same thing in about a month. We have been pushing a bill, and Joe Bolcom, who's probably the best state senator in Iowa for sure, he's probably yours, put out a bill which would enact to establish a solar energy rebate program. So, and making an appropriation. That didn't go very far because Republicans don't like appropriations. What Republicans like tax cuts. So he turned it into a tax cut and passed it out of the Senate 49-1, passed out of Ways and Means in the House with maybe 2 votes against. This year they killed it. Why? No reason. They just killed it. Republicans, I don't think, like the environment that much. They don't believe climate change is going on, and so for that reason they seem always to want to stop things like solar power. It's really beyond me why they would do this. It's their constituents who would be getting an extra $3,000 to put solar panels on their home. Doesn't go to any company, not winners and losers. It's just a way of making renewable energy cheaper. And so far it's down, but it may not be down for the end. We got a lot more time to go. And that's what happens in the legislature. You play off things. The other thing that I want to talk about is that I work at a place which is a research organization. We're very proud of the research we do. We're very careful. We know what we say is actually follows the data. We check everybody's work because we figure that the bad guys will just nail us if we ever make a mistake. So we're very good at this. But this is not necessarily the best way to make new policy. I can show you examples of how we have done that with the earned income tax credit, how we've done that on getting the minimum wage raised in the state of Iowa, and how we've done that in getting that production tax credit for small wind in Iowa. In all those cases, we wrote papers at a critical time in the process of bills. But when you think about it, Tim Dwight, it makes more sense than writing another paper. Or you write another paper and you get Tim Dwight, and that combination moves things, because people seem to want to respond when they kind of understand. And so by becoming the news, what I mean is this: how to keep them from killing your bills. And one of the things that I've done over time on renewable energy is not writing good papers, although again we write good papers. It's by trying to grab people's attention. And we've done that through a whole lot of bike tours around the United States, Midwest mainly, and around Europe. And here we are in Wisconsin, where we were able to bring in 3 TV cameras. We got 3. Never do you do that as a not-for-profit. We had print, we had radio, and we had a lot of TV. We had come to this town, and this is La Crosse, the University of Wisconsin at La Crosse, because they'd set up one of these programs of free bicycles, right? You just pick up a bike and you drive it across campus and leave it, and somebody else does the same thing. Well, they put that together, so we made it part of a tour. And our tour goes to areas where people are already doing pretty interesting things for the environment, for sustainability, and we kind of bring more attention to them by putting together a tour which brings attention to us also. And what we do is we're able to talk about renewable energy in a way that people listen to. And our tour that went in 2006, and that was the La Crosse stop. What we do is we went from Iowa City, we put our bikes on a trailer, it's quite kind of far, we dropped off in Waterloo, went over to Cedar Falls where there is a center at the University of Northern Iowa, got really good press, got some TV, and as soon as the TV left, we put our bikes on trailers again and went to Decorah and did the same kind of thing. No TV in Decorah, but we got lots in La Crosse. Another thing was going on in Austin. We went to Mankato State University and then had a ride from there to St. Peter, where Gustavus Adolphus is. All of those places we got great press because it's kind of interesting to have a bunch of bike riders on a tour of sustainability, but it's more interesting even than when we have bicycles that are solar powered. Put solar panels on these bikes. That seemed to be a big deal. I mean, we're not sure why, but it is a big deal. And we've been doing that since 2002. Some of the times we've done it, it's been pretty crazy. I mean, I pulled over from Amsterdam to northern Denmark. We had one train ride, a long train ride. At Maine, we rode all that way. pulling a 100-watt panel. A 100-watt panel is this big. And how do you do that on your bicycle? Well, obviously you have to have a trailer, which is cool because the thing is powering your bike. I mean, it is an electrically powered bicycle, and it's coming out of these big, huge batteries down here, but some of those batteries are being charged by that solar panel. And it's one of these things where you just hit the thing on your handlebar and it's like that. You're just moving. It's really, really fast. Think about wind, however. It was one of the worst ideas I think I've ever had because it was so ungainly and the thing was always breaking down. And at the end, there was this for sale sign on it all the time. Nobody else would write it except me. We got better, though, and we started a new design, and the new design was having smaller panels just on the front. Now, we couldn't get as much power out of it, but the thing was it didn't matter how much power we got out. It was the idea. And the idea is, these are solar-powered bike. That's cool. And that's all you have to have, is that to catch people. And here we are. Here's the bike again. The big guy back there with the yellow T-shirt is my friend Tom Cook in my department, Occupational Environmental Health. We just go out to get media. We are media hounds. And this is Tom's bike, which is much more sophisticated than mine. Recumbent, all kinds of stuff. But we just went around and got this message across that climate change is real. Global warming is a reality. And you can say that if you're doing it in a way that catches people's attention. Otherwise, if you just say climate change is real, 50% of Republicans are going to just go get a different newspaper article. But this is what we did in 2006. We nailed the press. That's over a week, 40 hits. And when I did this in 2002, this is what the Des Moines Register gave me. And there was my editorial, my op-ed, which is about 500 words, and pictures of the people who were along. And that big picture up there, the guy standing closest, is Joe Bolkin. I always take Joe along. He's a great bike rider, and he's a policy person. And we want to make the link between what's going on and policy. We got so many articles in the Cedar Rapids Gazette that we could get ridiculed in an editorial cartoon. Think about that. If they don't know who in the world you are, then nobody understands this. So that to us said, woof, we've got a lot of press. And we're talking about Schweindunger. They thought that was pretty interesting. Most of you know what Ragbrai is. This is Rag Sri, riding across Germany studying renewable energy, and we were talking about Schweindunger. Get it? Schweindunger. And in fact, that's where we went. We did go to places that took both waste from cows and pigs and a bunch of fish waste and all kinds of other stuff and generated electricity with methane. So yeah, you can do it. The last one we did, and this is the year for another one. I'm looking at September. Every 2 years. It's too hard to do every year. It's just too hard to do because it is really an organizational difficult. It's not a nightmare, I was about to say that. It is just hard as hell to do. And Slovenia is where I did it last time. This is Tom Harkin's staffer, my friend John Moreland. We started out at this little teeny university because I've been teaching there off and on. And every time you see these, you see the same yellow T-shirts. We change the date and we change a little map. So this is a Slovenia map. And this is our group. We talk to the boss of global climate change in Slovenia. You can get meetings with people like that because they're also interested in a bunch of Americans riding bikes that are solar powered around something. And so we just keep hammering that thing. By the way, this is a very beautiful place, Slovenia. This is Lake Bled, is one of the most beautiful places I've seen. We went there for no other reason than it was so beautiful. Most of the places we stopped to see things that were relevant. And this is a group. Mladen is the guy closest to you. Monster bike rider. He is incredible. And then Joe Bolkin, again, me, John Moreland with the Harkin staffer, and then the guy that doesn't look like he's that good a bike rider, it really is. Woolsey. He owns a couple of wind turbines here in the States. So he was our guy that, this is the industry. So here's a great picture because it's a dam from the 30s. And since you have everything in that dam, you have all the step-down generators, and you got all the stuff, you got the power lines coming in, why not put solar panels all over the thing if it's pointed south? And that's what this was. And, you know, we could see, notice that I've gone from that size of a 100-watt panel to a 10-watt panel. A lot easier to carry. And the point is that it doesn't matter. You just say you're solar powered. So I was solar powering my iPad instead of running the power to the bike. It didn't matter. How are we doing on time? I'm about
10 minutes.
10 minutes? Then why don't I go here? I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there or not. I don't know if I am. I may have to just... is it going to do that? I guess I first of all have to go off of here. How do I get...
I think if you right-click on it.
If I right-click on it?
On the link.
Let's try it. Let's try that. Right-click on the link. No.
No.
Maybe escape.
Yeah.
Hold on. Did that happen? Good. Good suggestion. This is one of the things that I think is a whole lot better than what we do. But it's doing something that's making a nuisance of yourself, or doing something that people have to come and think for a moment about what you just did, and when you have them in that position, then you tell them what you want. But you got to get them somehow. And so this is, you guys know all about flash mobs. I didn't know anything about flash mobs until I ran into this environmentalist in Slovenia a year and a half ago. And they had just done one in the train station. And the whole purpose was a great choreographer, great dance, and saying to the government, give us some more rail transportation. You've spent all this money on 4-lane highways. We're tired of it. We're trying to catch the last train. Very important in influencing the government of Slovenia on doing some things on their rail system, and how long is it going to take before it comes up? I'm not going to give them that much time. Well, okay, any questions about this? My point, several points. Number one, policy matters, right? Iowa leads because we had the first policy. Not a big requirement for the utilities, but enough. Okay, guess we're ready to go. Do we have sound? Yeah, I do have sound. I forgot that. Can I got about as much. I don't want mute, do I?
A couple seconds of it loaded.
Okay. And I heard it, so maybe it's going to be loud enough. This is a train station, Antwerp. You see it's like 4 minutes long. It's worth it. It's worth it. This is the 4. Chelsea, I realize I have 10. This is 4 of the 10. I'm finishing up. Whole idea of a flash mob. Don't let them see you coming. How do I make this big? There it is. Okay, first, policy matters. Second thing is, if you're going to be able to make policy, you have to get enough attention that people are going to just stop killing your bills because you don't have enough money. Even if you have the best studies in the world, you need something else besides that to push through. And here's my bike trips are one of those ideas. here is what I think is even a better idea, and I think you'll agree with me if the thing ever plays. Questions? It may be interrupted by this starting up, but any questions right here?
Where'd you get all this cool wind speed maps with all the colors?
They're at DOE, the Department of Energy. And I think you go to maybe Emerald National Renewable Energy Lab.
Okay.
And it's everything else just .gov or DOE.gov, and then you'll go. They are beautiful maps, aren't
Yeah,
they?
they're really good looking.
Yeah, I just found those the last couple days too.
Questions?
Yeah.
I was going to make a quick announcement because this is kind of relevant. A fellow senator of mine in student government is starting the University of Iowa student chapter of American Wind Energy Association. I don't know if you know that. But
I do.
Yeah, and he's really interested in getting you guys involved. He mentioned the Sustainability Summit and everyone that was there. So if anyone's interested in that, let me know.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're going to have to go home and watch this thing. If this is going to keep doing this.
Pausing it and then skipping back.
Sorry?
No, it's slow. It's too slow. Yeah.
I don't think.
I think maybe.
What can we use? Flash mob.
Flash mob, flash mob, train station. And there's one, actually, for India people, there's an incredible one from last November in Mumbai. And of course, it's better dancing because they all are Bollywood people, right? It is great. It's just too long. And this one is too slow. So let me get out of here. I'm not going to keep doing this. And now if it will let me out. Oh, escape, right? And anyway, flash mobs for sustainability. Other things we did, we visited schools. This is a school that is dedicated to the environment, a high school. High schools in Iowa are getting smaller in general. We're losing population. Same thing's happening in Slovenia. This high school increases all the time because people commit themselves to doing something in the environment, something in sustainability. Lots of solar panels going up every place, and we were riding around in this. This was some writing. This is the Alps, so it's took more than flatland as I usually do. What we got out of this, again, great newspaper articles. Cedar Rapids Gazette gave us an entire page. I've never got a whole page. I couldn't put the whole page on, and below me right there is a whole other picture. That's how big this was. The Register is always good to me. This time they gave you 700 words and 3 pictures. They will take it. And what you do, and my advice is, you don't lead with climate change because you'll turn off a lot of people. You slip it in. After you say, isn't it cool, they ride bikes? Isn't it interesting that Slovenia is making a boatload of money on doing things like this? Money and bikes, and then hit them with climate change. And because that's what I think you need to do. And climate change is winnable. It's going to be hard to do. But the reason I think it's winnable is that rule of 72. If you are doubling the amount of wind power you have every 3 years, you can get there. Without nukes, probably. But with nukes, for sure you can get there. And you got to make that policy better. It doesn't cost so much money that we can't afford it. That's a lie, and that's why we keep doing this report every couple of years in Iowa. That's why I want to do it again, to show that's still a lie. We still do not have high rates, even though we lead the nation in the amount of wind power that comes, amount of electricity that comes out of wind power. Texas has lots more wind, but they're a much bigger state. Percentage, they're nowhere near us. So, you become the story, and you can do one more thing. And this is how I actually got into politics. By mistake. And I was teaching at Cornell College, just kind of a regular economics professor. Decided that I was going to move into this place right here and live. And it was behind my friend Margot's house. And well, first of all, I got divorced and I kind of needed to move. And so I decided this would be a good place to move. I fixed it up, spent a lot of time, you know, this is, when you get divorced, this is a good time for, put your time into doing something like carpentry. And I lived there, damn cold in the winter, but I could get enough heat out of a good wood stove, had electricity, and was kind of happy until Margot, my friend, who's my landlady's ex-husband, decided that I must have been having an affair with her, which I was not. And in fact, that's Harry, the guy with the big beard behind me. That's her guy. But he didn't want me there, and so he tried to kick me out. So I came home one day from my professoring, found a note on the door that said, "Get out," that this is not a habitable place. So I said, well, I have an education, I know what to do, so I went to the Board of Health and tried to prevail on them to say, I understand you want to have regulations on where people can live, because otherwise some unscrupulous person is going to be putting 3 or 4 people into this. I agree with you. Just make an exception for me, because I was in the Peace Corps, I used to live in a house kind of like this, I know how to do it, not a problem. They said no. So, of course, we sued them, and of course we won. And of course, I had to stay here 5 years because I won. You can't leave once you win. But because of that, when I decided to run for office in a very Republican district, I had Cedar County. And if you know anything about Cedar County, there aren't many Democrats past West Branch. And I won by 400 votes, convinced that there were a whole lot of back to the land kind of gun-toting, nobody's going to tell me to wear a helmet on my motorcycle kind of guys who said, this guy don't like government, he's our guy. And that's why I was able to pass a law in 1983 that kicked off, the first in the nation, renewable portfolio standard that required electric companies to try out renewable power. 26 states have that now, but Iowa was the first one. That's it. So I think we've had questions, and sorry about the...
Anybody else have questions?
But anyway, just go home, YouTube, you'll see
I have a
some
quick
interesting
question.
things.
Is that football player the same guy that owns the solar panel company?
The very same.
Where is he based out of?
California.
Okay.
He lives here in town, though, sometimes. So Tim Dwight hangs around here. But the point is, who are legislators? They are 50 years old. Do they remember Tim Dwight? You betcha they remember Tim Dwight. Can that help us pass a solar bill? I think it can. You use what you have. And I still like flash mobs. Go make trouble. Okay, I think that's good.
All right. We'll be back here in 2 weeks, same time, same place. I don't know who we have lined up yet. Still working on it, but look for some posters. It'll be out soon. Thanks for coming.
Take some food.
Take some cookies.
Thank you.